They say that our lives are an interplay of purpose and chance. And if that's true, it could be said that our next inductee played that balance to perfection. A big man in physical stature, Bob Tasca was enormous as an entrepreneur, building one of the grandest automotive empires in the country. He was also one of the few, like Roger Penske and Bob Baer, who so embraced our sport, but was also able to accumulate great wealth. And he certainly did work the purpose, he certainly did work the word purpose. At the age 8, he wrote a school paper saying that all he wanted to do in life was become a Ford dealer. Later on, his dad, a struggling jeweler, said that he really ought to be a little bit more careful, get into something more worthy, more clean. But Bob's answer was, I'll make more money on Saturday morning than you make all week. And he forged ahead. Right from the start, in that one-car garage in Rhode Island, his business principles were number 1, hard work, number 2, obsession with quality, and number 3, customer service. And certainly an example of that approach was his courtship with Josephine Cambio. He sure worked at it, befriended her parents, over to the house every Sunday, washed their car, took everybody out for ice cream. Family is purpose. And the couple had 4 kids, Bob Jr., Carl, David, and Tricia. And then there's the other half of the game. That's chance. Some people call it luck, but it's really putting purpose to work. Consider this. In 1957, Bob had his tiny little garage in Rhode Island, a Ford dealership, and someone came steaming in on a Saturday afternoon with an overheating Edsel. Bob took a look at that thing, knowing the guy was on his way to the Cape, and said, you take my personal car, let me take a look at that thing. So he spent all night long building a new radiator for this Edsel while the guy went off to his party. The next day, Bob and Josephine delivered it over the Cape. Well, unbeknownst to them at the time, the guy whose Edsel they happened to fix was Ernest R. Breach, who happened to be the chairman of Ford Motor Company. And within a month, Bob Tasca, Ernest Breach, and Henry Ford II were best of friends. And that lifelong relationship was the heart of collaboration. It was chance again in 1960 when Bob decided to give those kids a break and take them from their chores at the dealership and take them to the drag races at Charlestown. All of them were smitten by what they saw, and almost immediately drag cars started popping up in the garage. That was because Bob had it in mind that he would use these cars as a tool to actually sell to the younger generations. Those drag cars were seriously fast, and they were tuned by an unbelievable line mechanic at Tasca named John Healy. Bob and his boys had quite the intense sense of competition, and that was demonstrated a few years later. One night, Bob and Josephine got an unwelcome call late at night. It seems that Carl had been out street racing, and it also seems that he had ended up in the Polky. So, Bob got out of bed, marched right down to the cell, walked up to his son Carl and said, Carl, did you win? Yeah, Dad. Okay, you can come home. And then there was a night that by chance, a local drag racer, a Chevy guy, named Bill Lawton, started doing burnouts outside of the Tasca facility. Well, Bob, at this point known as the Big Bopper, came storming out. And he went up to that Lawton and he said, Willie, I'll tell you what, you come to work with me and you drive my cars, or I'll make sure you never win a race again. Well, it worked like a champ. That was the beginning of one of the most successful motorsports teams in all of American history. The 60s turned out to be just plain wild for Tasca Ford. They modified and raced Ford Superstockers, those wheel-standing Cobra jet Mustangs and fuel-funny cars. Tasca almost seemed to taunt Ford into the performance industry. And most historians at Ford will tell you today that it was actually Bob Tasca who coined that famous phrase, win on Sunday, sell on Monday. By 1971, though, the economy was beginning to change a little bit, and exhaust emissions were getting to be an acknowledged problem, and race cars were getting specialized. You couldn't sell a drag car off your floor anymore, and so Bob gradually disbanded the racing operation. The relationship with Ford, however, continued to thrive, and Bob just traveled constantly. He was all over the country helping production and design engineers debugging various problems. And some little organization called the Tasca University trained literally thousands and thousands of Ford employees. And a clear example of that profound influence that Bob had happened in December of 1996. A guy named John Force happened to come into Providence, and so he decided he'd stop by and say hello to these famous Tasca people. Well, that led to a great Italian dinner, as you can imagine. And during the case of that, John turned to Bob and said, Bob, you know, I need your advice. Things are getting a little shaky with my sponsor, Pontiac. Well, Bob said, I'll fix that. And within 24 hours, John Force had his Ford factory sponsorship. In 2000, the grand opening of Tasca's 165,000 square foot Pontiac Avenue facility opened. It was a celebration of what the first and second generation of Tascas had done, and a celebration of the arrival of the third. This truly amazing facility has Ford, Lincoln, Volvo, Jaguar, Mazda, Aston Martin, and all manner of other brands. A decade later, Bob Sr. passed after a long illness. And the size of the funeral was such that, believe it or not, a section of Interstate 95 in Rhode Island was closed. But that's not where things ended. Go to that Cranston facility and nothing has changed. There's a clear bustle about the place, imbued almost with disarming customer friendliness. And let there be no question that these guys are selling and servicing 1 ton of cars. And the racing is back. Carl's still at it. A popular regular at New England Dragway in his Cobra Jet Mustang Superstock. Meanwhile, Bobby III was the first in the land in a Ford-bodied funny car to get in the 3-second margin at 317 miles an hour. And his boy, Bobby IV, began in his junior dragster at age 8. Nah, nothing has changed at all, because it seems that Bob Sr. just plain is still there. It's his spirit, his purpose, his chance that has built an empire and guides it still today. So, may Bob Jr., his brother Carl, and Mike of the third generation come up for Bob Tasca and set Induction in perpetuity.
Good afternoon. I'm Junior. He's the race car driver, and that's my son Michael. So we got 2 second and third generation here. It's very humbling to be up here right now, to be a part of this event. I can't believe how special it feels. And we're so grateful that you thought enough of my father to consider him to be the Hall of Fame class of 2014. It's really special, and we'll never forget this day. My father would always say, in life, you might forget what someone did for you, but you'll never forget how someone made you feel, okay? And it feels real good right now, when I speak on behalf of my whole family, to be up here with my brother and my son to accept this from my father. He's looking down right now, and I'm sure he's got a real big smile on his face. Well, you did a great job with this. I want to add a little bit to that Ernie Breach story. My father knew it was a prototype car, and but the guy didn't know that he was dealing with Bob Tasca Sr., because he was out back working on a car. So when they said to my father, you gave him a car, he said, but I knew his car was worth more than the car I gave him, so it didn't make any difference to me. And it was true that we delivered the car back. Hal and I, my brother David wasn't even born. Breach went to a wedding at the Cape, and they swapped keys. Never even saw him. I guess at the gate they swapped keys, took his car back. And about a month later, he wrote Bob Tasca Sr. a letter, not knowing that he was the guy that actually worked on his car, and he was, you know, he had a great place, and he fixed my car. And don't forget to thank that fat mechanic in the back for what he did for me. Well, the fat mechanic in the back was my father. So from then on, you know, he nurtured his relationship with Ford, and even though we have other brands now, we cut our teeth on Ford, and they'll always be special to us. Again, thank you all so much. I'm proud to be here along with my family. Thanks again. I want to say one more thing. I think my father's the first drag racer, because I know we're surrounded by a lot of guys that like to take left-hand turns. So we're proud to be part of, possible with you guys, okay?